confuse our calling with the caller, we get into trouble.
That's a great one.
If we become absorbed with trying to figure out our calling, and that occupies our mind, and our calling defines who we are rather than the relationship with the caller, we get into trouble.
Hi friends, I'm Caine, and you're listening to the Life and Leadership Podcast, where we share conversations with faith-fueled leaders from all over the globe.
God, I have so much to be thankful for, and even in the midst of my suffering, you are present.
I feel like the next generation are rising and choosing consecration, not deconstruction.
I'm an ambassador. I'm representing another kingdom.
Now, my prayer is that our time together each week activates you to fulfill your God-given purpose and to follow Jesus wholeheartedly as you lead within your particular sphere of influence. Hi friends, I can't wait to get into today's conversation. But just before we do, I want to remind you that you can get each new episode of Life and Leadership delivered straight to your inbox. So just head to propelwomen.org/podcast to sign up today. I'm so excited because here on the podcast today, we're welcoming my good friend, Dr. Arianna Malloy. She's a brilliant professor and author, and I know you're going to love this conversation. So let's dive right in. Okay, I am so fired up. Arianna, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm pumped.
I'm so glad to be here. I'm pumped too.
I know. I'm thinking, okay, just in our little banter before we got on, I thought our podcast listeners need to strap themselves in today because I think you're matching my energy, and that is very dangerous for anybody on the other side of this. It's like, put your coffee down before we even start. But
this might be true. I was a cheerleader in high school. I can't take that out of me.
I could see it. I thought, I am in love with you as soon as I saw you. This is awesome. Okay, I just want, the listeners here to just come up to speed a bit. Just tell me a little bit, the Cliff Notes version of your story and how you've ended up. Here you are, a professor of Biola now. You didn't just wake up and there you are. How did you get to there?
Yeah, that is a story. I think the shortest version is I had no idea that I was even smart enough to go to college. In school, I was very sociable. I loved Jesus. I loved people. I had some unfortunate encounters with some teachers who didn't make me feel very smart. And so I went into college. I'm a first-generation college student, so my parents hadn't finished college. They've done amazing things in their life, but I was just sort of figuring this out on my own with their help. And I remember sitting in a class with a professor named Dr. Bill Purcell, and I had some kind of passionate, convicted comment that he let me make in class. And he said something like, "Thank you, Dr. Molloy." And I had this whoa, he just called me doctor. Could I do that? And I think in college, I also felt like I could ask those why questions that no one had time for earlier. And I felt like my wings had been let out of a cage, and all of a sudden I could stretch, and it was amazing. But I didn't have a sense of what to do afterwards. I knew who I was in God as a college student, and I really knew how to be a good daughter. I didn't know what adulthood looked like. And I felt like everyone else did, but didn't really I didn't really know. So I moved back at home with my parents. I worked for a church for a year. That was not a great experience. I worked for 2 women starting a nonprofit. That was a phenomenal experience, but I was a little bit bored. And I was single, which I know is very strange in the Christian church sometimes. And so I thought, what should I do with myself? I went back and I got a master's degree. And during that time, I felt even more alive. And I studied organizational communication in the workplace and about work. And I was so fascinated with how Christians work, how they use their faith as a motivation to work well or as an excuse to not do a good job. And I thought, we cannot have this. We need to approach everything with veracity and passion and accountability and treat others well in the name of Jesus. And so I took a year off. I worked for the nonprofit that I had been working with before. And then I got bored. And I was single. And I thought,
I'm hearing a theme here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I applied to some places and I got into my top choice. And it was a very rigorous program, not always friendly to faith, but I learned a lot. And in fact, my original dissertation advisor was an atheist and told me, "I don't know if people will want to hire you if you study faith and communication in the workplace." And I said, I think the places I would want to work would hire me, so I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
So I got there, but honestly, it wasn't until the third year of my time in my PhD. I was walking across campus. I go into all the classrooms that I'm teaching or taking a class, and I pray over them when no one else is there,
Wow.
just to ask for the anointing of the Holy Spirit. And I was doing that, and I saw some freshmen walking with their parents. My heart just filled with love for them. Like this overwhelming love
Wow.
that I don't even know how to explain. And so I called my parents and I said, I think I'm going to be a professor. And they were like, great, because they're so supportive. And then in my journey with Biola, I saw the ad. I thought, well, this will be a good first start. And I walked on campus. And Chris, I was walking on campus in this like little junior high area that's currently being redone for the film school.
Yes.
And I felt that tapping of the Holy Spirit. And I thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm supposed to be here.
Wow.
And there were a lot of little things that led up to figuring out how to release my own expectations and dreams. But ultimately, the Lord was gracious in letting me not only study work as a calling, but to experience it for myself, which I didn't think I would.
Okay. I'm very riveted and I want to go down 15 rabbit trails, but I'm not going to. So, okay, how long have you been teaching then?
Yeah, a little over 10 years.
So, and you still love it?
I actually try to hold my hands out with the Lord every couple years and walk around and say, Lord, is this where you still have me? Because I never want to be a closed-fisted person with a sense of calling. And I still love it. I mean, it's changed. The world has changed. Even the college texture has changed. My heart for the students, I don't know how to explain it. I love them all. I love the ones who want to be there and who don't, the ones who are checked out and coming late, and the ones who are in the front and ready to go. I love all of them.
Okay, you are the dream professor. I've got like I've got a senior and a freshman right now, and so I want all the teachers to be like you. I want them to have this sort of passion. So it is something when you can actually believe that God has called you to do what you're doing, whatever sphere of life that is in. That to me is the goal. Like, I mean, actually, Propel exists for that, to say, we are all here to do what God's called us to do, whatever the title, vocation, whatever it might be. So that makes me excited. Now, you've written a book, Healthy Calling, and I remember when our mutual friend, Dr. Joy, Joy Quayle, she contacts me. She goes, Chris, you have got to know, this woman, this book. And I thought, as I started to kind of look through, I thought, what a very necessary subject for us to be talking about. I've been in full-time vocational public ministry for 35 plus years. And so I think if some of us had read some of this earlier, some mistakes could be avoided, I think, down the track. But we're in a moment. It's not easy. It's not easy being a leader. It's not easy fulfilling the call of God, period. And the world has shifted. And so I think this is why I really want to talk about this. I want to know, firstly, what led you to write this book? Like, why? And why now?
I love it. So I've been fascinated with the concept of calling since grad school when I came across a secular journal. I was studying meaningful work because that was kind of my backdoor to studying faith in the workplace. I've just always been fascinated by that. Just as a secondary tangent, my parents were very inclusive of me, and they're the reason I know the love of God. They did not come from homes that modeled that, but they chose to change their legacy and with each other modeled that to me.
Wow.
And so at the dinner table, we would talk about work. And they would even talk about my job as a student as a job. And so I think I've always been fascinated with this idea of work and an opportunity to bring Jesus with us. It's never been a disconnect for me. But I came across somebody in a journal called the Communication Yearbook, wrote that some people talk about meaningful work as a calling. And it was like, whoa, this is... And then I just began paying attention to how much we as Christians use that term. I think sometimes we can overuse it or we use it wrongly. And I was just curious, how do people even talk about it? So my dissertation was simply, how do people talk about work as a calling? What are their experiences of this? I studied lawyers, stay-at-home parents, an NFL coach, people all over the spectrum of occupations. both Christians, non-Christians, people who
Yes.
believed in the universe and their spirit talking to them. In fact, one artist that I studied, he was a guitar musician, and he said that his guitar was his caller. So it's everywhere, which, by the way, is a really cool way to talk about Jesus. If people don't believe in God and they feel called, you could say, well, who's calling you? How do you
It's
tell
fantastic.
me more about that? So I was really fascinated by this. And just to be real clear for definitional folks who like definitions, work as a calling. I mean, as Christians, we all have the calling to love God and love others, hands down.
Period.
That's our mission. But in work, it looks like something specific. And there are 4 things that it requires. The first is that it's meaningful. So I'm not just simply like turning the light switch on and off. There's a meaning behind it. I could be doing that, but I find meaning behind it. That's the first one. The second
Sorry,
is
I just
that
want to pause because I want to ask you. I'm so sorry because I think in that I heard the story once. I can't think where I heard it, where someone went to NASA or I'm pretty sure NASA or somewhere in Florida, and they came across a janitor and he was mopping the floor, and the guy was on his way to see someone at their senior executive level, and he said to him, hi, what's your name? Whatever it might have been, John. And what do you do here? And he goes, oh, I put a man on the moon. And this is while he's mopping on the floor. Is that what you're talking about when you write?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. I interviewed someone who worked at the makeup counter of a mall, and she said, I get to make people look beautiful.
Right.
And so it's less about, what the actual job is. And I think we often get distracted by that, in fact.
Yep.
And it's more about how we use our skill sets and our passions in our perspective.
Totally.
And it's not that we should just be happy with wherever we are. I think sometimes that means that we forget to examine who we are. But at the same time, I think we need to say where we are has opportunity.
Very much so.
So that meaningfulness can be in any job. And people think it's only in certain jobs. It's not. Construction workers, presidents of companies, stay-at-home parents, all have meaning if they want it to be.
Okay, number 2.
So meaningfulness, that sense of calling with God, that skill set and passion. I once interviewed a nonprofit CEO, and she said, passion alone is not enough. That makes you a great fan. Passion and skill set is required. So there's the developing of skill. And I think sometimes, if someone thinks they're going to be called to be a doctor, they don't go into the operating room on day 1. They go through that training and apprenticeship. So that's that. But then here's the 4th part that I think we often forget about calling. It is pro-social. It is about other people. If we're not making a positive impact on other people, it's a great hobby. According to the criteria, it's not really a calling. Calling is about others, loving God, love others. And so I just think those things intrigued me quite a bit. Now, the thing that really captured my attention after studying that, and research shows that if you feel called, you're the most motivated at work, you're the most satisfied, you're able to withstand organizational change, people want you in the room, you're in the room where it happens, and all of those things. But more than any other people group, if you feel called, you are the most prone to burnout.
Wow.
And that's where my mind just kind of went, wait a minute, what? We're the most prone to burnout? And as I began doing my research over the years with that in mind, I saw that burnout from a calling is different than regular burnout. And we have to talk about that. There's a deeper level of shame and toxicity that can really corrode us in our relationship with God and with others.
Absolutely. Yes. And do we want to talk about that? Because I do, because I think that's yes. So we need, and even the causes of it and why. Now I'm 58, 35 plus years. Now I'm not saying I'm, exempt from it happening, but thus far, by the grace of God, 35 years strong, of continuing to, why would someone be in that position? So here I am at 58, I'm looking at 60, still in it, still loving God, still passionate, still the same, feel every day that same sense of the calling I felt at 21, like Christine, you're called to change the world. Why are some still like this at 60 and why are some not? Because we all started at 21 on the same altar calls, saying yes to the same God with the same passion and the same zeal. So what can happen that can cause one to cross the finish line and one to burn out? At Trevecca Nazarene University, leadership is more than a skill, it's a calling. The School of Leadership and Interdisciplinary Studies offers cutting-edge programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels, all designed to prepare you for a career that impacts your world. In any of the leadership degree programs at Trevecca, you'll be guided by experienced faculty as you build expertise that can prepare you for promotions and new career opportunities. You'll get to know a supportive cohort of classmates who understands you and are working towards similar goals. Best of all, you'll take flexible online classes so you can continue working and prioritizing the things in your life that matter most. Academic excellence is at the heart of Trevecca's mission to educate and equip leaders. That dedication has been recognized by Fortune Education, naming Trevecca's Doctor of Education in Leadership the most affordable online doctorate in education 2024. No matter your field, Trevecca's leadership programs equip you to lead with integrity, creativity, and purpose. Visit trevecca.edu/Christine to get started today.
I love that question. I have so many ways I would love to respond to that, but I think the first thing is if we confuse our calling with the caller, we get into trouble.
That's a great one.
If we become absorbed with trying to figure out our calling, and that occupies our mind, and our calling defines who we are rather than the relationship with the caller, we get into trouble.
And we could just stop this right now. I need you all to pause and press stop, press rewind, and listen to that. That alone is going to help you to finish to cross that finish line. Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, keep going. But that is so powerful.
I love it. And, I am a communication professor, but I do believe calling is inherently about relationship.
Yeah.
Relationship with our caller, relationship with ourselves, relationship with the community we serve and who impact us. And so I think the healthy callings continue to exist when we don't confuse the calling with the caller.
Yes.
When we begin to shift just even a little bit to loving that feeling of calling, which is great. On a good day, it's like 80%. There's always that 20% that I would rather not do all the grading that I have to do, but I love my students, that kind of thing. It can move without us realizing it to usually two dark sides. One is job idolatry, where we begin to idolize our work. And one is workaholism, which is the addiction to work. And it's the most cushy, welcomed addiction that we have in Western culture.
Absolutely.
And so when we do those things, we get to that place of burnout. And here's the thing about burnout from a calling. It's not simply, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I don't like what I'm doing anymore. It's, I don't know who I am anymore. There's a deeper layer of that.
Yeah.
So I think, circling back to your question, what keeps you that way? Well, first, Chris, you model this whenever I get a chance to hear you talk. Yeah. You have a humility about you that bolsters that strength. And so I think the linchpin, this is the big thing, this is what I talk about, is actually humility. What does the Lord require of us? To act justly, to love mercy. And what do we do in order to walk with him? Walk humbly with our God.
And I think, obviously, I'm just thinking how to answer this because it can sound like hashtag humble. Okay, so that's not it. But when I'm thinking so how do I respond to that? So yes, and for me, and you can correct me, you're the professor, I am not. So, but humility, is a right understanding of who I am. So it's attributed to C.S. Lewis. I'm not sure if he's actually said it, but someone did. That, it's not thinking of yourself less, it's thinking less of yourself. But that would be true, is that to keep a right view of God's God and I'm not. It's actually so liberating because number one, my shoulders are not broad enough to bear the weight of, if people go, how do you run A21? You're in 19 offices in 15 countries and have hundreds of staff. How do you do all of that? Well, I'm like, I don't carry the weight of that. I don't even I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm stewarding what I believe is the calling of God, but only God is God in this equation. I'm not. I think obviously I have a visible and sort of high profile platform, but again, in my mind, it is truly, to the best of my ability, used to glorify God and, people can think whatever they think, but in my mind, that's kind of where it is. I've got a lot of checks and balances in my life where they need to be to ensure that stays in place. But I think at the end of the day, I've never forgotten not only from where I've come from, but what Jesus has done, and that truly none of us can fulfill our calling in our own strength. Like, at no point on this side of eternity am I ever going to be good enough to do what God's called me to do. Because if it's a supernatural, fundamentally, if there's a supernatural component to it, woven into the fabric of that is God has made sure I need him to do what he's called me to do. So of course I'm going to burn out because I actually physically, humanly cannot do what I'm called to do. And so I think it's if I got into the pattern of trying to do, well, look, I'm good enough now. I'm known enough now. I'm connected enough now. I'm smart. I would have a breakdown. But because I'm like, this is all still got, now I'm a good steward, very hard worker, hopefully have wise counsel around me, all of those things. But I don't try to be God in this whole thing, I think.
100%. You basically said it all. So thank you for that.
No, I'm just trying to, you need to say it in a pragmatic way. And this is why I'm glad you've written a book about it, because what happens is we either all go to Andrew Murray and read about humility, or we go to, and it almost seems unattainable. So then it means we have to have conversations about humility, because what there is either this one conversation, if you're well known or you have a big platform, surely you're not humble, surely you're a celebrity, surely, whatever, there's that. Then there's you've got to sit on a rock in a monastery and just, beat yourself and I'm humble. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Yes, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he will lift you up in due season. So if he's going to lift you up in due season, what does ongoing humility look like? Because if you've humbled yourself in the sight of the Lord, you are. So the problem is not visibility. The problem is not exposure. The problem is not, mostly, I think if people have a problem with how many followers you are or how known you are, it's normally because they wish they had more of what you've got. So it's, that kind of take the plank out of your own eye and, but take the log out of your own eye before you're looking at the plank. But we need to have this conversation about humility.
We absolutely
and a robust conversation, because I agree with you. This is what made me really want to have you on here, because I'm thinking the people that I know, and some may be profoundly well-known and have large platforms, and I'm not talking just in this sort of vocational ministry, but people that feel called CEOs of companies or actors or, music stars, profound platforms and known, are also some of the most humble people that I know as well, which has ensured their longevity in their calling, whatever sphere of influence that might be. But because we're either intimidated by certain things or frightened, like whatever, there's a fear. So many people are actually not stepping into their calling. They're either blowing it up through arrogance and they weren't humble, or not even stepping into it because I don't want to not be humble. And, so it's, what's at stake, though, is calling. What is at stake is fruitfulness. What is at stake is purpose. So speak to kind of all of that, which I know you does,
I would love to.
Speak to that.
Well, I love that you brought up the problem of humility feels very abstract and unattainable.
Yes.
It's like, how do you recognize humility and then pursue it? Well, there's three parts to humility. That if you can break it down, it's kind of like doing a good workout where you localize the muscle. You're trying to get that muscle that's really hard and you think about it. And so here are the three parts. The first part you talked about. You know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you're not distracted by either one.
That's great.
You're aware of them.
Great.
You're not incompetent. Yeah. No one wants to work with someone who doesn't know themselves. If Jesus was humble, we have to ask ourselves, did he know who he was? He knew who he was. He knew who he was. So again, I think especially as women, sometimes women tend to be demure and modest in a way that we've socialized those terms rather than recognizing it is okay to know what you're good at and it's okay to know what you're not good at. Let's not get distracted by either one. That's the first thing. Right. The second thing is in humility, and this all comes from biblical accounts and looking at empirical research as well, that humility has to do with the ability to delegate or learn, or be a life learner is another way to say
great.
that. Humility recognizes you will never know everything. You know, that whole adage of the more I know, the more I know I don't know, and all those things.
It's true,
and
though.
That's
Yes.
really true.
Yes.
And then the third part, and this is the part that I could probably talk about forever, which is the ability to step away for a moment, to Sabbath. You know, I know we all talk about Sabbath a lot, but I don't think we can talk about it enough.
No,
because
totally.
it is that first thing that God called holy in the Bible. It is the thing that will recharge us. And ultimately, Sabbath is a relational act with Jesus, to be with him in a tithing of our time. And the people who have a healthy calling, it's not that they work less. Sometimes they have this incredible capacity to just work a lot. It's they know when they need to take a little break. Yeah. They recognize they're not the God of their own universe, and they've set up people well. They've delegated in organizational structures other people they can trust, and they're going to go for, a walk or a trip. In fact, I started a practice several years ago on Friday mornings. I call it my pregame Sabbath strategy. I go for a walk down Corona del Mar by the beach for 30 minutes by myself. I don't listen to music. I don't do anything. And I just go for a walk with God. And I do it the day before my Sabbath. I Sabbath on Saturdays, not for any particular reason. It just works for us as a family. I do that to get my heart ready, to let things that were stressing me out in the week surface, to acknowledge that and remind myself who God is. Nature speaks to me. So for me, like going for a walk is like the best thing ever, moving my body and stuff. So humility we can do that if we know what it looks like. And the only way we'll know what it looks like is to follow Jesus. Not the stereotype of humility, not the culturally understood type of humility, but because Jesus was humble. So how do we do it like Jesus?
Okay, I'm loving this because it really is the key to longevity. It's the key to sustaining. And I think some things that we call humility are not. Shrinking myself, reducing myself, pretending I'm not all that God's called me to be that's not humble, a humility. It is that right attitude in our heart of knowing you're God and I'm not. So I do. And I love it. You said some people have just got different capacities. So there are certain things that God has wired me up, and I do have a capacity that is, but within that, I've still got to know, when do I press pause? When do we need, and I think I've had that rhythm in my life for decades. So it ensures that we keep going. We're living in a day, it's so interesting because you've got partial generation that has never really Sabbathed. And so, man, this is all like revelation. And then we have another generation that hasn't really worked. And I'm like, well, Sabbath presupposes work. And so I'm like going, okay, and I'm, because, kind of my life verse, people go, well, what is it? I go, well, it's, almost you could, it's 1 Corinthians 15:57, but you could almost guess, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is never in vain. And I'm always going to be the one that talks about the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And that we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works that God. So I'm an activist, of course. So that's it. Like, man, we have got a job to do. And what we have, I think the problem is we have too much sort of either or. It's like, oh my gosh, no, that's just going to lead to burnout. Or so let's not talk about works. And we're confusing that, yes, we are saved by grace through faith. No one's talking about salvation here. We're talking about fruitfulness on earth. And, but the other side is that, well, I think it all depends on me, so I never take a break. And so both of those ditches are the problem. So me going and sitting on a mountain for the term of my natural life on earth and, contemplating my navel and God is not going to fulfill the purpose for which I'm on the earth. But me going and going and going is going, again, same end goal. I'm going to burn out and not fulfill my purpose. So we need to be having healthy conversations. I love that it's even called healthy calling, because our fear of either ditch has rendered us ineffective. And I'm just such a believer in activating the body to do what God has called us to do. And like everything, it's interesting to me, we set things as oppositional forces that are really just two sides of the same coin. So do we need to be going full on? Yes. And also, do we need to be Sabbathing and resting? Yes. And Is it all dependent on God? Yes. And do we have to do all of our part? Yes. And it's like I'm going, this brings the and to it rather than the, okay, I'm stepping out of everything. So thank you. Thank you because you're so committed to calling, because it's a word that's been so misused. Of course, I still speak a lot to young people too. So I'm really thinking, I'm even thinking like of, big conferences that I've got coming up. And I was saying to my husband in 2025, I need to begin to talk about calling again, because that language of calling has left sort of, there was a time where people are like, don't put guilt on people that God's called them. Well, he has called them. We we need to be more nuanced a little bit about what that means, because I think old school was like, well, he's called you, leave your job and, come and work for nothing in the church. But we're not talking about that. We're saying wherever you are, you're called to live on mission for Jesus. And the fact that you are wrestling with this and have given us a great tool for that just makes me so happy. So as we wrap up, is there anything else you kind of want to say to everyone?
Oh, thank you. I think that what I hope we can encourage the next generation for is not to be afraid as we figure out what our passions and skill sets are. It's going to be messy. My husband has this phenomenal capacity. He's a marathon runner. He's traveled to 61 countries. He's, really smarty pants. Went to Yale, Oxford. I mean, he's just amazing. He's like Indiana Jones in real life. And he has an incredible capacity. My capacity is different. I feel things a bit more deeply. I get a little more tired faster, and that's okay. So part of it would be that our calling to love God and love others cannot be separated, as you talked about, from the fact that we have a personal God. We don't want to overemphasize that personalness, but we need to take the risk to figure out what he's made us to do. Totally. And recognize that he will waste nothing. He will redeem everything. And he has a plan all the time. It's not like he takes a break from that. So he's in constant process. And so when I talk to college students, when I talk to organizations that I'm doing consulting with, or people in midlife, I know I'm really feeling that in terms of having a young kid and other things to take care of. We're all called. Calling is dynamic. It is ever changing. And it's an exciting relationship with the caller.
I love this. You're speaking my love language. We are, Paul writes to Timothy, we are saved and called. And so, to find that purpose is phenomenal. So just thank you. Thanks for being on here. I'm going to get you on again because I love your fire. Yay! All right. Thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Wow, what a conversation. Now, Dr. Arianna's details are listed and tagged in the description of this episode so that you can keep up with her and connect further. And to you, our listeners, I love you and I so appreciate you. Thanks so much for joining us on the Life and Leadership Podcast, and I'll see you back here next week. A special thanks to Trevecca Nazarene University's School of Leadership and Interdisciplinary Studies for sponsoring our podcast. Find your calling and advance your career with a degree that brings your future into focus. Learn more at trevecca.edu/Christine.
Access more